sovereign God, and we just ask that you would be working supernaturally there to protect people and to bring peace to that place. And so as we gather this morning, just thank you that we can be here, that we can study your word, that we can worship together. And I just thank you for the people that you've brought here this morning. Just open our eyes to your word and just give us ears to listen to your message. In your name we pray. Amen. So yeah, I feel like I've got a bit of the short straw this morning because the guys have come in a little bit bleary-eyed, a total of 8 hours sleep each over the last couple of nights. I'm also a little bit tired. So my challenge this morning, I should probably be alright to stay awake. I don't think I've ever fallen asleep standing up before. But a few eyes in the front row already look a bit sleepy, but we've got some thumbs up, so that's good. Okay, so going to try and keep things succinct and just make sure that we know exactly what we're looking at this morning. We are in Matthew chapter 17, verses 14 to 20, and I'm going to start by reading those. And it says this: "And when they came to the crowd, a man came up to him and kneeling before him said, 'Lord, have mercy on my son, for he has seizures and he suffers terribly. For often he falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples and they cannot heal him.' And Jesus answered, 'O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me.' And Jesus rebuked the demon and it came out of him, and the boy was healed instantly. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, 'Why could we not cast it out?' He said to them, 'Because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you.'" So I don't know if you've read that passage before. Maybe you've heard kind of some of those words quoted before, this idea that, hey, if you have enough faith, you can move mountains. And it's potentially it's a passage which leaves itself open on first glance to be very abused by people. And I don't know if you've ever kind of come across this idea that you need to have enough faith. If you can just muster up enough faith, then you can make mountains move. It's about you and the amount of faith that you have. And if you're able to do those things, then hey, you don't need to worry about your health, because as long as you've got faith and you trust in Jesus and you can muster that up, you're going to be healthy, you're going to be wealthy. All these things that you want, if you can have enough faith, God promises you. Well, there's perhaps a bit of a problem with that, isn't it? And we've even started talking about this maybe over the weekend a little bit, but what happens when those things don't happen? If that is your viewpoint, if that is your belief, if you come to this passage and you see that and you're like, okay, I just need to have more faith, and then all these things will come, all these impossible things will happen, well, what then do you do when perhaps those things don't happen? When you don't live a particularly wealthy lifestyle or a particularly healthy one, if you're caught out by sickness, what does that then mean? Does that mean, well, you don't have enough faith? Are you even saved? Are you even a Christian? If you're not living a healthy, wealthy, prosperous life, does that say that you have a lack of faith and therefore you are not a Christian, that you're not saved? Or maybe not so much health, wealth, prosperity, but maybe you kind of even think, hey, I have a problem with sin, I want to kind of overcome this, I just need to have more faith that Jesus can save me from that. I need to believe more, I need to believe harder, and I can overcome sin. And it's all about this idea of kind of digging deeper into yourself. It's about me, what I can do to achieve these things. And if we read this passage, and I'm kind of starting off with this, and we'll go back to the beginning of it in just a bit, but if we read it like that, then we start turning the Bible really into a bit of a self-help book. And maybe this is a little bit unfair to do because I don't know the intentions of these books necessarily, but I just did a quick Google search around some names that I'm kind of familiar with, of authors who maybe I believe, or at least I'm led to believe, that do preach this kind of thing. And some of the book titles say things like this: Think Better, Live Better, The Power of I Am, You Can, You Will, The Abundance Mindset. Now, like I said, I've not read any of those books. I don't know exactly what's in there, but those titles to me, this idea of, hey, the power of I am, you will. It's putting all the emphasis on what you can do, what you can achieve, how you can muster up enough faith. And hey, that might sound good. People are attracted to that. It gives a sense of empowerment. We read the Bible and we can come away feeling good, like we've got all these things that we can achieve and accomplish. But ultimately, I don't believe that is what the Bible teaches. I think the Bible teaches actually something quite opposite. We are promised that we will be persecuted, that we will suffer, that we need to lay down our lives for Christ. But I just want to start there with this idea that when we read that last verse, because that's kind of where we're going to build up to, this idea that if you have faith, you can move mountains. What does that really mean? And I just want to start, because we're tired, and I don't want us to go away from here thinking anything different. That does not mean that you just need to have more faith in your life. You need to muster up more faith. It is not about that. What we're going to see is it's not about how much faith you have, but what you have your faith in. Amen. So, let's go back to the beginning, really, of this passage and just have a bit of a recap of where we're up to. So last week, we went through the transfiguration. And if you remember what that was, is there was 3 disciples who were up on the mountain with Jesus. It was Peter, James, and John. And Christ, Jesus, was transfigured before them. He kind of lifted the veil into the spiritual realm. And there was also Elijah and Moses, and it said that Jesus' face shone like the sun, and his clothes became bright white. And they heard the voice of God. What an amazing, incredible experience. And Wes talked about this, like your mountaintop experience. And I don't know, maybe you've not experienced anything like that. I certainly have not experienced anything like that where I've seen the face of God. However, there have been times where I have sensed kind of a sense of clarity. So those disciples up on the mountain, they're there and they're seeing Jesus perhaps in a new, fresh way, perhaps in a way that's more clear than what they've seen before. And I think there have been moments in my life where I have had a sense of that. And I know we can kind of get carried away by emotions sometimes, and there's things that kind of factor into that. But there's times where I've felt more aware of the presence of God and more aware of the sense of reality of the spiritual world, of Christ being real. So I think of times, even as a student, and maybe that was a formative time for me. I went away to college, meeting with Christians of different backgrounds, but we all related around the gospel of Jesus Christ, but maybe had different experiences. And going away with those people to some Christian conferences, being in a room with hundreds of people, a new experience for me, singing and worshipping together, and having that kind of whole week surrounded by Christians, kind of gave me what I feel is like almost like a little taste of heaven. It's not perfect. In fact, we were kind of staying in little trailer cabins. It wasn't perfect. I hope heaven is a little bit better than what we experienced. But that sense of oneness, sense of being together, of being of one mind, at those times I've come away from those evening sessions where you're hearing a preacher preach and you're worshipping in that way, coming away feeling like it's so obvious what I need to do. It's so obvious that Jesus is real. It's so obvious that I need to live in particular ways and dedicate and sacrifice my life for him. I don't know if you've experienced that. For them, for the disciples, Peter, with his experience later on in 2 Peter, he described it, he wrote about it and talked about how they were eyewitnesses of his majesty. However, that's where they've just been. And as we start this passage, what is happening is the disciples and Jesus are coming down from the mountain. They're coming away from that experience, that clarity, and suddenly they are surrounded by chaos, by mess, by suffering. In fact, I thought it'd be helpful just to get a bit of context. I don't normally like to do this, but just to pull from one of the other Gospels. So we're going to be looking at Mark 9, a little bit, the parallel passage here. So let me just read this, but I think it gives a little bit more context to what was going on. So again, coming off the mountain, transfiguration, coming down. And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" And someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able. So they've come down from the mountain. 3 disciples on the mountain, presumably the other 9 are down at the bottom. They're surrounded by this crowd of people. A boy possessed by a demon. His father brings him to them, trying to get him to be healed. They can't do it. And the scribes are there, and they're arguing with the disciples. Now, we don't know the exact nature of that argument. We're not told. But I would imagine it's probably some argument, some question around, well, where's this power that your Jesus is supposed to have? You say that you can heal. The disciples have been healing people. And now maybe they're calling them frauds. I don't know. But there's unbelief there. The scribes are there and they are unbelieving. And the disciples are helpless. They're faced with this situation. Maybe they feel a little bit abandoned. The 9 of them have been left at the bottom. The 3 of them have gone up for this special occasion with Jesus. They're left behind. Now they're starting maybe even to doubt themselves or doubt Jesus. We did have this power. We were healing people. And now this boy comes to us and we can't do anything. What's going on? Just this scene of unbelief. So you've got this complete contrast, the mountaintop experience of the clarity, seeing Jesus for who he really is, away from the world. And then down at the bottom of the mountain, we have real people, real suffering, real confusion, unbelief. And maybe we've experienced those as well. But the reality is that the temptation is sometimes to retreat from the world and to retreat to those mountaintop experiences. We want to stay in that constant position of, well, let's keep the mess and the suffering of the world out, and let's just stay and experience God for who he is. So let me just read this quote, which should come on the screen. It is easy to feel Christian in the moment of prayer and meditation. It is easy to feel close to God when the world is shut out. But that is not religion, that is escapism. Real religion is to rise from our knees before God, to meet men and the problems of the human situation. They were up on the mountain, but they had to come down. They couldn't stay up there. We talked again at the weekend about our mission statement as a church, that we are on mission together to know Christ. That's almost like the mountaintop experience, to know Christ, but also to make him known. And to do that, we need to come down the mountain. We need to be in amongst people. We need to engage with people who are unbelieving, who are suffering. So what does that look like? Matthew 25, I think we get a glimpse of this here, where Jesus is speaking, and he says, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of my brothers, you did it to me.'" The call as a Christian is to step into people's lives and to be intentional about it. We used that word at the weekend. Sorry, ladies, I'm pulling a lot of stuff from the weekend. But we talked about how we need to be relational and we need to be intentional with people. And that means meeting people where they are suffering. So my question and my challenge to you and to myself is, well, where am I doing that? And where are you doing that? Where are you engaging and meeting with people who are unbelieving, who don't know Christ, maybe would actively reject him? Where are you meeting and engaging with people who are suffering, and how are you able to step into those lives and show them Christ in that situation? It's easy for us to kind of stay in the confines of the safety of church, of Christians. You know, the weekend, again, was a great sense of that. It felt comfortable. It was great getting to know people, to dig deeper with each other, and actually find out a little bit about each of our own messes. And that's great to do. And we also need to go out and do that with other people. There's times when we need to retreat and to spend time deeper with God, and Jesus did that himself. In Luke 5 it says this, "But now even more the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But he would withdraw to desolate places and pray." There's obviously a time to withdraw. There's a time to gather strength again. But we do that with the help of God. We go to God in those times. It's not just a case of, oh, I need to just go have a lay down. It's a case of, hey, I need to re-engage with my Father, and I need to then go out to those who are suffering again. And I know in my life, both of those I need to do more of. It's not a case of, oh, I just spend too much time worshipping and praising and reading my Bible by myself, or, oh, I spend too much time taking the message to the lost. I don't do enough of either of those, but that's kind of the challenge. One of the challenges this morning is to see how we can act in those places. So that's my first point, the first summary, this idea of coming from the top of the mountain down and meeting with people. My second point, the second thing to look at is there was misplaced faith that we see in this scenario. One thing I just want to talk about to begin with just very quickly is we see that it was a demon possession. Now, I just think it's important to say that not all medical issues are demonic in nature. Just because we see it here and it's talked about that, maybe from the outside it looked like he was suffering from a form of epilepsy, it was seizures, he was foaming at the mouth, something like that. In this case, something very specific was happening. There was a demonic oppression. There was a demonic possession that was happening. And actually it was throwing the child into the water, into the fire. But there's plenty of instances we see Jesus heal many, many times where it is not demonic in nature. We live in a sick and a fallen world. We suffer from physical ailments. Yes, we are fighting a spiritual battle, but our bodies are also, we are just living in the flesh, and things are going to go wrong. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a demon possession or a demon attack, but we do see here the character of the devil. That he has taken this child, and his aim and what he wants to accomplish is destruction. He wants to destroy this child. He wants to destroy something good that God has created. And we see his character, and we see the names that he has in the Bible. He is the tempter. He is the enemy, the adversary, the murderer, the deceiver, the accuser. This is the spiritual battle that we are fighting. So let's try and understand what was going on. Because in verse 16 it says, "And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not heal him." So they'd obviously heard the disciples had been healing. They had been casting out demons. In Matthew 10:1, Jesus had actually given them authority to do that. And he says, "And he called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction." So they've been given authority to do it, but we come to this situation and they don't seem to be able to do it anymore. Why were they not able to cast out this specific demon? I think they were surprised as well. They afterwards, they go to Jesus and go, "Hey, why were we not able to do this?" So when we say they had little faith, and that's how it's described later on, it's not that they didn't have any faith that it would happen. In fact, they were surprised and confused that it wasn't happening. They had faith that it would happen, but their faith, the basis of their faith, was in what they were doing. They had done it before. Whatever kind of magic words they felt that they were saying, the mechanics of it, the routine, the ritual that they went through, they had seen success in what they had done, and they were starting to rely on that themselves. So we see it described as, well, you couldn't do it because you had little faith. But the implication, and really what it's talking about there, is not so much the size of their faith, but the poverty of their faith, the weakness of it. Not the quantity, but where they were placing it. They were confident that it was going to work, but their confidence was misplaced. They were placing it in themselves, or they were placing it in the ritual of what they were doing. And actually in Mark, we kind of see in Mark 9:29, we see that Jesus says to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." And again, this is not, hey, you just didn't say the right words, or you need to pray a little bit differently about this one. This was, no, you needed to direct yourself towards God and to Jesus, because that's where the power lies. Not in your words, not in what you're doing, not in your methods, not in your routines. The power lies in God. And so he's directing them back to that. So for ourselves, if we're serious about sharing our faith with others, when we're striving to point people towards Christ, are we just tempted to rely on ourselves, on our methods, on the words, on the challenges that we make? Wes kind of gave the example last week of a prison ministry that he was part of, and where he or the people he was with was able to share the gospel with one group of prisoners. They came in, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they responded well. They seemed to hear what was being said. Their eyes were open. They saw the truth of the gospel. They came to Christ. And it's like, okay, great. This works. We can do this. Next group of people come in, do the exact same thing. No success. And that's because it's not in what Wes was doing or the power of those specific words. It is because the power of God and what he was doing. Now, obviously, we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared to have an answer for the hope that we have. We need to have a clear understanding of the gospel so that we can share it well. We're told that we have a responsibility to go out and share it with other people. But it is God that does the work. 1 Corinthians 3 says this, when Paul writes, he says, "What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you believed, as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth." So, even as we're kind of, as Meadowlake, as a church, as we're growing, as we're growing in kind of our depth of relationship, as we grow, hopefully, as more people join us, what are we relying on for that? Are we thinking, hey, we're going to rely on ourselves? Quality of the production that we put on, the quality of the things that we do, is that what we're going to be dependent on? No, we need to rely on God. Now, I've heard it said before, and maybe this is a common phrase in Christian circles, but you can judge the health of a church by the size of the prayer meeting. You can judge the health of a church by the size of the prayer meeting. Now, I guess we don't have a prayer meeting here, but we do meet on a Wednesday and we pray for each other. And the reason that people say that is because, well, that shows where our heart and dedication is. If we are dedicated to prayer, what does that indicate? What does that show? That shows that we are putting our trust in God. That we're not doing it ourselves. We don't just turn up and think, oh, we can do this. We've got this. We're the ones who can change lives. No, we go to God humbly in prayer and we ask for him to act, because we know in and of ourselves we do not have the power to do that. Like Paul and Apollos, we are privileged to be able to be the people who plant and the people who get to water, who get to share the gospel, who get to disciple, but it is God who does the growing. It's not the size of the building, it's not the bank account, which is a good job. It is based on our prayers, based on our dependence of God. So we see Jesus' reaction, this misplaced faith, and he's frustrated. We see that. He says, "O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me." The twisted, the perverse generation he's talking about, he's pointing at the disciples, he's pointing at the people who don't believe in him. They're twisted and perverse because of their willing unbelief. And he knows that his time on earth is short. How long is he going to put up with it? He doesn't have that much longer. He's only a few months away from going to Calvary, to laying his life down for us. And those words still echo for us today. How long will he put up with unbelief. For you sat here this morning, are you still in unbelief? Have you not given yourself over to Christ? Because God is patient. He says that he is patient. He doesn't want anyone to perish. And that is why he's not returned yet. Because he wants more people to come to know him. But his patience does not go on forever and ever. There will be judgment. There is a time that will come. We see this whole imagery of coming off the mountain into the chaos down below kind of is really a parallel of what we see with Moses. When he receives the Ten Commandments in Exodus 32, he's up there, he receives the Ten Commandments, he comes down to a scene where the Israelites, they started to question where Moses is, they started to question the reality of God, and what they've done is they've taken all their jewelry, they've thrown it into a fire, and Aaron says, oh, I threw it into a fire, and out popped a golden calf. And they worship this golden calf, saying, this is your God, O Israel, who led you up and brought you up out of the land of Egypt. So Moses comes down from this mountain, this time of meeting with God, and he comes down to the unbelief of the Israelites. And that time, that ended in judgment. It says this in Exodus 32, verse 9, and the Lord said to Moses, I've seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you. If you read those verses, it does explain how God is patient. He actually relents from completely rejecting and destroying them. But there were 3,000 men that were killed that day because of their unbelief. He will not put up with it forever. So that was my second point there. Misplaced faith. So my third and final point is saving faith. So if it's not about the size of your faith, if it's not an issue that it was little faith, well, what is it about? What is it about primarily? And we've already kind of said that in Mark 9:29 it talks about pointing towards prayer. And actually, if you noticed, if you look carefully at your Bible, you might have noticed that Matthew 17 verse 21 doesn't exist in a lot of the Bibles that are probably in front of you right now. And the reason for that is that it used to be there, but then they found some earlier manuscripts and they realized that this verse wasn't in some of the earlier manuscripts, and so it wouldn't have been part of the original canon that was there. However, I'm just going to read it anyway because it kind of echoes with Mark 9:29, but Matthew 17:21 says, but this kind never comes out except by prayer and fasting. And you see that kind of echoed in Mark 9:29. It's this point again that it's not you, it's not how much faith you have, it's about where your faith is being directed. It requires prayer because it points towards a need for God. And verse 17, that's what Jesus says. He says, bring him here to me. Jesus heals instantly. He is much greater than the disciples. The disciples couldn't do it, but Jesus could. In an instant. He healed him instantly. And as we go out into the world and we try and point people towards Christ, we're obviously trying to represent Christ as best as we can, but we need to remember that we are continually pointing people towards Christ, not ourselves. It is Christ that saves. And what does it require from the person to be saved? It says your faith can be as small as a mustard seed. And we've seen Jesus reference mustard seeds before in some of his parables, and it is used symbolically as something that is very, very small, which is why I think when he criticizes them for you of little faith, he must be talking about something a little bit different. It wouldn't make sense to say your faith is too little, you need to have faith of a little mustard seed. He's saying, no, your faith is misplaced. If you have faith in the right thing, even if it is as small as a mustard seed, you will be able to move mountains. Nothing will be impossible for you. And that's what the man demonstrates. In Mark 9, the man who wanted his son to be healed, we see him demonstrate that perfectly. In Mark 9 it says, the man says, but if you can do anything, Jesus, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, if you can, all things are possible for one who believes. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, I believe, help my unbelief. This man came with little faith. He was not supremely confident. He came to Jesus and said, hey, if you can, show compassion. Jesus questions him on that and says, hey, all things are possible for one who believes. And he says, I believe, just help my unbelief. His faith was not huge. He was not someone who was digging deep into himself, mustering up more faith. His faith was weak. It was small, but he had placed it in the right place. It was a small prayer, but it was a powerful one because of who he directed it to. So the kind of example or analogy that I kind of think of with this, I'm privileged, feel blessed that I've been able to fly to a number of different places in the last few years. Personally, I feel as though I'm quite a logical person, so when I go to the airport, I'm getting on a plane, I know the kind of rough statistics, it's the safest mode of transport. I'm very confident getting onto a plane. I don't get nervous before flying. I'm happy to walk on knowing that I'm safe, and when I get on that plane, it's going to take me to my destination. I'm going in 2 weeks. I'm pretty confident. I'm going to take off and I'm going to land back in the UK 9 hours later. I've flown with some other people. Chloe is getting a little bit more nervous as she flies, and she's not that excited to fly. And we often have conversations on the way about how everything's going to be okay and it's the safest thing and what have you. Not that confident. I'm sure there's other people here who maybe don't enjoy flying or are nervous getting on. But we both get on the flight. We both get on the plane. And our destinations are the same. And yeah, you can go on more confident, or you can go on more weakly, you can go on with great faith, you can go on with little faith. Either way, the important thing is that you have placed faith in the correct thing. You have put your faith in the plane and the pilot, and they are going to get you to your destination. It's not about how much faith you have, it's the object in which you are placing your faith. And people come to Christ, and there's people who come with confidence and with faith, and they come before him, and there's nothing lacking. I know exactly what's going to happen. And there's other people like this man who came weakly. He wasn't completely confident, but he knew enough and he trusted enough to place his faith into Jesus. And this is described as a mustard seed because the aim is for it to grow. I'm obviously not saying that we should just be happy with a weak faith or something that isn't confident. But the way for it to grow is to practice and to train and to trust more. We need to exercise our faith. Art is sat in the front, and if you haven't noticed, he's been working out at the gym quite a lot. I've recently started following him on Instagram, and all his posts are at the gym. And the reason for that, even at the weekend, when the rest of us were kind of eating Funyuns or popcorn or whatever, Art was there doing push-ups. He exercises, he trains, his muscles get bigger. If we want our faith to grow, we need to exercise our faith. We need to run the race. We need to live the Christian life. We need to look to Jesus more. Hebrews 11 says this, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. If we run this race, if we cast off sin and we look to Jesus, he is the one who founded our faith. The reason we have faith is not because of ourselves, and he is the perfecter of our faith. And the more that we go through life and we trust him more, the more we place that faith into him, the more faithful that he will prove to be, and our faith will grow as a result. So, last thing, just to say as I close, because I just want to address this very last line again, which says, nothing will be impossible for you. So what does the Bible mean when it says nothing is impossible for you? Does that mean that I can say literally to a mountain that does not exist in Texas to move from one place to another? We need to look at the whole context of the Bible. And we don't see examples of that. We don't see even the most faithful people in the Bible telling objects to move. Because that's not the purpose of why we were saved. That's not the purpose of the faith that we have. In fact, the things that we are kind of commanded to do, the things that are potentially seen as impossible, are things like forgiveness and perseverance. Luke 17, verses 3 to 6, where we have a similar kind of idea. It says, "Pay attention to yourselves. If your brother sins, rebuke him. And if he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times in the day and turns to you 7 times, saying, 'I repent,' you must forgive him." Now, the apostles heard that and they're like, "Well, that's impossible. How can we keep forgiving?" Jesus says, the apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." And the Lord said, "If you had faith like a grain of mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you." So we have a similar kind of sentiment. If you have enough faith, you can move trees. If you have enough faith, you can move mountains. But what is the purpose of that? Well, in Luke 17, it's so that you can forgive and forgive and forgive. Something that, by the world standards, is impossible to do. How can you forgive that person after everything they've done wrong? Well, as a Christian, with the power of Christ and with faith, nothing is impossible. We can forgive, we can forgive, we can forgive. Philippians 4. "I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. You are indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me." Another potentially abused verse. I can do all things. And we hear that and people use that to mean I can do literally anything. There's nothing that I can't do. But what's the context here? It's I know how to be brought low, I know how to abound, I know how to be content in every circumstance. Something that seems to be impossible, you can do that as a Christian. If you have faith, you can forgive. If you have faith, you can persevere through any situation. So I'll just finish with this quote. I think it summarizes a few different areas with this, and then we'll come to the Lord's table. And this was just from an article I read. It said, "Mustard seed faith then is faith that kills the works of the flesh and produces the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace and patience are mountains that can only be climbed by faith. Faith, after all, expresses itself in love. Mustard seed faith believes the gospel will go to the ends of the earth and triumph over the gates of hell. And the clearest evidence of mustard seed faith is whether you love God and your neighbour. Our greatest enemies are not outside of us, but within. Our greatest foe is the hate and rebellion that overtakes us. And mustard seed faith, because it is placed in Jesus Christ, gives us the victory over our sin. Yet we are freed from the sin that enslaves when we rely on Christ and not our own strength and works. Mustard seed faith is enormously powerful, not because of our faith, but because it unites us to the God who raised Jesus Christ from the dead." And so that's what we're gonna do now. Is we're gonna remember that this faith that we have and the confidence that we have, and the reason that our faith can grow is not because of us, but because of what Christ accomplished on the cross. And so we're going to gather around the Lord's table in just a minute. We're going to take the bread and take the juice representing the blood of Christ. And this is a reminder of why we're able to be here, why we're able to have faith, because God was faithful to us. He demonstrated his love for us on the cross, and we can now come to him as believers, knowing that our eternity is secure. So just take a moment, a couple of minutes just to reflect, and then we'll come around the table together.